DBT, Emotion Regulation 3. In this session, we'll be looking at the topic of changing emotional response. There are 3 key skills within this topic: check the facts, opposite action, and problem solving. To change unwanted emotions, we must first check the facts. Sometimes that's all that's needed. When the emotion doesn't fit the facts, we need to practice acting opposite to our emotion. And when the emotion fits the facts and the situation is the problem, we need to do problem solving. Check the facts is a skill we use to determine if our emotional reactions are appropriate for a given situation, so that we can figure out what skill might be useful in order to help us better regulate our problematic responses. Changing beliefs and assumptions about a situation to fit the facts can help you change your emotional reactions to it. This requires that you first check out the facts. Checking the facts is a basic strategy in cognitive therapy, as well as many other forms of therapy. So let's think about why it might be important for us to check the facts of a given situation. Well, firstly, our thoughts and interpretations of situations and events can set off painful emotions. It's not necessarily the events themselves that do that. For example, a person who believes that a loved one has died in a car crash will feel deep sadness and grief, even if the information the person was given was incorrect and the loved one didn't actually die. Another reason is that faulty beliefs about what we think we need can lead to emotional misery. For example, I must be in control, instead of I like being in control better than being out of control. Checking the facts would mean that you realise you don't always have to be in control, although you like to be. Faulty beliefs about events can also cause new problems. For example, if someone thought they could pass a test without studying for it beforehand, when the person had low scores on all previous tests, then they would likely fail and then have new problems to sort out. Another reason we might check the facts is because our emotions can affect what we think about events and how we react to our thoughts. Temporary moods, for example, can influence our ideas, our memories, perceptions, and interpretations of important events, particularly when the events are complex and ambiguous. The very same information can take on very different colouring, depending on our emotional state. For example, when we're angry or annoyed, the cheery friend who calls might seem more of a pest than a loyal friend. Believing that our thoughts are absolute truths can be a recipe for disaster as well. It's important to keep in mind that no one has the absolute truth. Different opinions on the facts can be valid even if we don't agree with them, and there's always more than one way to see a situation, and more than one way to solve a problem. Knowing the facts is essential for solving problems. Incomplete knowledge of the facts can interfere with our problem solving. And a final reason for checking the facts is that examining our thoughts and checking the facts can change our emotions. When we respond to incorrect facts, learning the correct facts can change our emotions. In addition, knowing the actual facts of a situation can help us problem solve emotional situations. That is, knowing the facts can help us to change the facts. So how do we go about checking the facts? Well, firstly, we need to ask ourselves, what's the emotion I want to change? So think back to the session on naming emotions. It's much more difficult to change an emotion when you don't actually know what emotion you're feeling. Facts about a situation might fit one emotion, but not another. So pay careful attention to your current thoughts, the physical sensations you might be experiencing, your posture, your action urges, and verbal statements when you're reviewing ways to describe emotions. Secondly, ask yourself, what's the event prompting my emotion? This involves describing the facts that you observed through your senses, just the facts. Challenge any judgments, any extremes, and black and white descriptions. A more balanced view of the facts might change your emotions. One problem in figuring out emotions is that we often describe situations and our own thoughts, emotions, and actions in very judgmental language with absolute black and white statements. Usually, this isn't an effective way to describe an event because it can evoke strong negative emotional reactions. And so our mental description of the event, rather than the event itself, may be the actual prompting event. Thirdly, we need to ask ourselves, what are my interpretations, thoughts, and assumptions about the event? Often we add to what we observe, and then we react to what we've added, rather than to what we observed. We might jump to a conclusion and then act on that. So it's really important that we think of other possible interpretations. Practice looking at all sides of a situation and all points of view. Test your interpretations and assumptions to see if they fit the facts. An example of this in the instance of fear might be hearing a creaking sound in the night, which is the fact, and then thinking someone is breaking into your house, which might be the interpretation. Or for jealousy, it might be watching the person you love sitting close to someone else, which is the fact, and assuming that they're now in love with that person would be the interpretation. The fourth point is to ask yourself, am I assuming a threat? If so, you need to label that threat and assess the probability that the threatening event will really occur. Often what seems threatening at first glance is not so threatening once we think about it. So try to think of as many possible outcomes as you can. The simple act of generating those alternative outcomes can itself increase your belief that other outcomes are possible. The fifth point is to ask what's the catastrophe, and to imagine the catastrophe actually really occurring. What are the realistic consequences? Sometimes the facts are every bit as bad as we think they are, but sometimes we make a bad situation worse when we catastrophize the facts. Catastrophizing is exaggerating the negative characteristics of the facts and focusing on the worst possible outcome. For example, it's terrible and it's never going to get any better, or I'm going to die. Catastrophizing can increase both physical and emotional pain. And even if catastrophes do occur, does catastrophizing, so focusing on the most distressing or hopeless parts of the catastrophe, really help anything? Instead, imagine coping well with a catastrophe through problem solving, coping ahead, or radical acceptance. Finally, you need to ask yourself, does my emotion and/or its intensity fit the actual facts of the situation? It's worth checking out facts that fit each emotion and asking why's mind. In this session, we focused on changing emotional response by first checking the facts. In the next session, we'll look at changing emotional response by doing opposite action.